Interesting, in a number of situations, there were some unintended consequences. One of the biggest unintended consequences was particularly for factories, particularly in mining operations, etc., the standards of safety, the standards of pollution, and a number of things did more harm to the developing countries. But the OECD, and there's something wrong with that. For the OECD, the United Kingdom and others, this was a win-win strategy. Tax haven was seen as a good thing, as long as a clear distinction was made between tax avoidance, which meant legally minimizing tax obligations by taking advantages of exemptions, loopholes, and allowances within the tax codes and tax laws of the developed countries, and tax evasion, the unlawful circumvention of tax obligations. Interestingly, because of double taxation treaties, countries who had double taxation treaties with the developed world, like BVI, didn't have any form of secrecy, because the whole purpose of the double taxation treaty was to make sure that you pay tax, if you pay tax in a lower tax jurisdiction, such as the BVI. The developed country who had a higher tax would not charge you tax at that high rate on the income, the profits, or whatever that you have already paid tax on in the lower countries. So the BVI determined to capitalize on its networks of treaties and become a tax haven, a low tax haven, by the way, not a no tax haven, a tax haven based on utilization of the double taxation treaties in which information on tax paid was shared between us and the developed country. Interestingly, around 1979, 78, etc., when I started becoming aware of these type of things and looking at it, the BVI's budget, I believe in 1979, don't quote me, was either $8 million or $7 million. Interestingly, because of the double taxation treaty, in January of each year, we used to get a check of $1 million. Remember, our budget was $7 million or $8 million. We used to get a check of $1 million from the Winston-Salem Corporation. Anyone knows that corporation? Winston-Salem cigarettes. They were using a special provision in the tax code where if a company declared, self-declared, I think it was its global income, it could pay, I believe, 0.5% of that. If it's self-declared, it would pay it by a certain date. So every January, we would get a check of over $1 million, which would fund the government for a long while. But during the late 70s, attitudes within the developed world to tax havens began to change. As a result, most of the double taxation treaties that were extended to the BVI were abrogated by the OECD countries themselves. Some of these having proved to be of little or no value to us in the BVI, as they were never ever used. By 1979, the only meaningful one left to the BVI was the one with the United States. That was the one that Winston-Salem used to use. Just as companies started to take notice of the treaty and were really beginning to register and incorporate and establish BVI operations in order to benefit under this treaty, the United States government announced its intentions of renegotiating all its double taxation treaties with tax havens. This was largely as a result of US concerns about what they called treaty shopping by residents of third countries who piggybacked on the treaties to establish their own operations and companies and other structures within these poor developing countries to benefit from not paying any tax in the United States. So the BVI was summoned, as everybody else, to the negotiating table. A BVI team of public and private sector officials held a series of tough negotiations with the United States. Eventually, they hammered out a new double taxation treaty. It so happens this was the last international treaty to be signed by the Carter administration. Unfortunately, it was also the first international treaty to be abrogated, unilaterally terminated by the subsequent Reagan administration. The Reagan administration considered it too favorable to the BVI and demanded that we return to the negotiation table once again, this time to remove clauses that they felt were incompatible with the new administration's intentions of establishing a model tax treaty. You see, they chose the weakest link to make an example. Normally, the United Kingdom would have been expected to negotiate as equals with the United States on behalf of the BVI. But as the UK itself had long since cancelled its own territory with the BVI, it did not have the moral authority to negotiate on BVI's behalf. So, for the first time ever, the United Kingdom treated the BVI as a nation and allowed us to negotiate with the United States on our own and by ourselves. That's not completely true. The UK had a spy sitting down in the room to make sure that whatever was said would not go against their interests. However, the negotiations resulted in a stalemate, and the US unilaterally terminated the treaty, doing so partly as a warning to others with whom it was holding similar negotiations. You see, what they wanted to do, they wanted us to agree to all types of clauses and restrictions, which would have made the BVI nothing but an open door for the IRS. The BVI team said no way. You can imagine the doom and gloom in the BVI at losing the flagship treaty on which the offshore aspirations were based. With the loss of its much valued double taxation agreement, no longer was it possible for BVI to exploit its low tax structures. Users of BVI companies could no longer benefit from paying any taxes in the BVI. Why then would they be here? Why then would they pay taxes? The BVI therefore had to restructure its attractiveness to offshore entities. It now had to become tax neutral. It had to, if it wanted to compete with those jurisdictions who levied no tax on offshore entities. But every challenge contains the seeds of opportunity. An American lawyer named Paul Butler, who happened to have been in the BVI a few weeks ago, who was then advising the BVI negotiation team, came up with the idea of introducing a concept he called the International Business Companies Act. Butler drafted the initial IBC concept. He modeled it on Delaware law in order to make it more successful than IBC's laws that had been already drafted and enacted in Barbados and Antigua. And he tried to show us why we should accept his concept, because it had features, he said, which they didn't have. Perhaps as a means of ensuring our acceptance of his concept, he promised that he had hundreds of companies lined up to come to the BVI if we enacted his version of the BVI, of the IBC Act. What had we to lose? I'm not too sure we ever realized whether or not he really had companies lined up. The next step was for the British Virgin Islands Attorney General, Lewis Hunt, himself a skilled draftsman, to rework the Butler draft and to make it more compatible with BVI jurisprudence. The rest is history. The success of the IBC Act has resulted in a thriving financial services industry in the BVI, contributing somewhere between 60 and 65% of all direct government revenue. More than 1 million companies have been formed and incorporated or registered under this act since it came into being, with approximately 500,000 companies now are still active. A cadre of professionals and professional service firms has developed to service the needs of these companies and their users. And the BVI has enacted further legislation to enable a raft of complementary services and products to be offered and provided from within the territory. So the IBC, the crown jewel of BVI offshore offerings, has facilitated or going through a metamorphosis from a fledgling low-tax center to a less pejorative offshore financial center to today, where we have been welcomed within the throes of international financial centers. The premier offshore corporate domicile. The IBC has given BVI an anchor on which to base its strategies for taking BVI forwards towards its next stage of development. Now, when the IBC Act was passed, it was pioneering. For a long time, it remained the benchmark against which the company registration and incorporation laws of other jurisdictions were judged. Since then, the BVI Business Companies Act, or the BVI-BC, of 2004 has taken the BVI success to even greater heights. While others have sought to copy this act, some even its spelling mistakes, none has quite succeeded in matching its impact and its attraction. And it has led to the development of a plethora of ancillary industry support businesses. You see, the industry now provides hundreds, maybe thousands of jobs, both directly and indirectly to British Virgin Islanders. It puts food in people's mouths, shelters over people's heads, contributes to the training and development of our people. It pays people's mortgages and helps build the infrastructure on which our islands and the industry itself depends. And it has been a major contributor to the BVI enjoying a per capita income in excess of 30,000, ranking BVI within the world's highest countries with such per capita income. It is worth remarking that the single most important factor in the Act's success was that the private sector was fully involved at every stage of its development. As a result, the Act met industry's needs in a very precise way. This public-private partnership continues to serve us in good stead. Indeed, the single most important factor in the success of this legislation, a factor we have subsequently sought to duplicate in all our industry-related legislation, was quite simply the fact that ours was a better mousetrap. Simple to operate, designed in consultation with its potential users, geared to meet their needs, highly functional in doing the job, and coming with all the appropriate guarantees and protections. This is what has been the BVI advantage. Now, the development of BVI as an international financial center has been a long agenda of successive governments, not a strategy of short-term gain. Indeed, a critical component of the success of the industry has been the unwavering support of both the governments and oppositions over the years. There has been not a political divide when it comes to anything to benefit the offshore sector. Both government, opposition, everyone work closely to that. Even today, as I speak, they are together, or they're supposed to be together, working out, looking at a piece of legislation which is going to come before the House shortly. And just to give you an example, when the IBC Act itself was introduced, it was introduced by Cyril B. Romney, the Chief Minister of the BVI. And it was seconded by H. Lavity Stout, the then leader of the opposition, who had been the previous Chief Minister when we started working on it. So the BVI has always harbored aspirations of becoming a preeminent business and financial center of high levels of integrity and professionalism. For the last 30 years, the goal has been to develop BVI into a thriving, balanced, reputable, and responsible financial center for the economic benefit of the islands and its people, as well as for the legitimate investors and institutions that seek a politically stable, business-friendly, cost-effective jurisdiction for their wealth planning, international joint ventures, and tax-neutral structures. This special destiny never ends. Sometimes it slows. Sometimes it falters. Sometimes it goes off track or appears to get sidetracked. Often this happens as a result of ignorance, prejudice, and pressures internationally, or poor, inadequate, and inappropriate responses locally. But the BVI finance industry always resurfaces and endures, more resilient, more resolute, more vibrant, and strong in its boldness. Along our journey, BVI has evolved into a modern, forward-looking international financial center that has matured and garnered widespread international recognition for successfully combining local and overseas expertise, and for offering a diverse range of innovative, high-quality offshore services, products, and professional services. It is a jurisdiction where the rule of law is applied, where there is comprehensive legislative and judicial systems in place to protect the rights and interests of investors, as well as to deal with all aspects of financial activity, and where investors can be assured of the confidentiality of their transactions. So this is what we have achieved and can be proud of thus far. Let me now turn to the challenges ahead. The international financial community, by which I mean the governments of the developed world, the G8, the G20, and the supranational bodies they control, such as the IMF, the Financial Action Task Force, the OECD, and the Financial Stability Board, have conjoined with non-governmental organizations such as the Tax Justice Network, Christian Aid, and with organizations such as the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists to place the activities of small island international financial centers everywhere under intense scrutiny and spotlight. This has been especially so for centers associated with the United Kingdom, that is the Crown Dependencies and the Caribbean Overseas Territories. The intense scrutiny has resulted in a fundamental global shift and a hardening of attitudes against international financial centers. Indeed, you might say that the terms climate change and global warming have taken on new meanings in the world of small international financial centers. It is a world that is getting warmer, and hotter. For the Virgin Islands and for all international financial centers, these are challenging and turbulent times, grueling and daunting times times of transition and change, the onslaught of the initiatives from these people, agencies, has been a transformational and paradigm-shifting one. This is not all bad. Yes, change and transition are challenging, but they also bring with them new opportunities for those who are prepared to grasp them. I am not claiming that for the BVI and the other Caribbean overseas territories, or the Crown dependencies, that this has been anything more than an arduous period. We have all walked a long and dark road together. We have received a wake-up call as we watched those many who were writing our obituaries or singing our demise as international finance centers. But wake up we did. We have put in place new procedures, protocols, policies, and laws to ensure compliance with international regulatory standards, and we are still here. We have been facing increasingly intense international pressure and scrutiny for over 2 decades now. The demand from all quarters for greater transparency of our financial services programs, policies, and procedures have grown even louder. Our legislation, law enforcement, taxation, and international cooperation modalities, as well as our regulation, have been reviewed, evaluated, analyzed, and inspected ad nauseum to ensure that they comply with the relevant international standards. And we have constantly had to raise our game as the standards have become more demanding. And by doing this, we have ensured that the BVI financial services sector has not only survived, but has thrived. The result is that BVI, along with the other small island international financial centers in the Caribbean overseas territories, have withstood this onslaught relatively well, perhaps better than most. In the process, we have transitioned from the early accusations levied against us as uncooperative, non-compliant, and poorly regulated tax haven, as places that sheltered money launderers and the ethically challenged, to a position today where we are increasingly viewed as cooperative, compliant, well-regulated international finance centers that apply and subscribe to international standards and that play their part in protecting the global financial system. Testimony to this was the recent statement by Prime Minister Cameron that we should no longer be called tax havens or secrecy jurisdictions. This was in response to, or in recognition of the fact that we have not only signed tax information exchange agreements and continue to do so, but we also have signed up to a special thing that Mr. Cameron wanted us to sign up to, which was a multilateral exchange of information agreement with the group of 5, the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Germany, and Italy. You see, compliance to international standards happens to be the linchpin upon which we must base our future as international finance centers. And Mr. Cameron's affirmation is recognition of the fact that the concept of tax haven, as applied by so many of our detractors and critics, is an outdated and anachronistic one. As one of my overseas regulatory colleagues so aptly put it, usage of the term tax haven betrays a fundamental failure to understand the world of offshore financing. The two are quite separate and distinguishable. The term tax haven is distinctly different from offshore financial center in two main criteria. The first, the lack of transparency, and second, the lack of law or administrative practices that prevent the exchange of information for tax purposes. Another positive affirmation of our compliance with international standards has been the IMF's decision to drop the distinction between offshore and onshore finance centers. What this decision means is that it is now established and regarded that to distinguish between jurisdictions solely based on geographic location or size is not right. The IMF concluded and advised that the distinction should now be between well-regulated centers and those that are not so well-regulated, with the deciding factor or calculus being the jurisdiction's ability to comply with and implement internationally accepted and recognized standards of regulation. While there had long been a belief that small island international financial centers provided refuge for illicit funds from money launderers, corporate fraudsters, corrupt politicians, and tax evaders, the independent mutual evaluation exercises conducted on offshore centers have demonstrated that, in fact, many small island international financial centers, such as the BVI, are sophisticated, well-run financial centers that by and large fare much better than the developed centers when they are evaluated against the same regulatory standards. Let me be clear, tax evasion, money laundering, and international crimes are not offshore problems. They are global problems. All jurisdictions, whether offshore or onshore, are at risk. I am not claiming here that abuse does not happen offshore. Far from it. A number of offshore service providers have assisted or facilitated abuse in the past, whether knowingly or otherwise, whether through ignorance, indifference, ineptitude, inadvertence, or inertia. And I will not stand here and attempt to fool you that there has not been evidence of misuse and abuse of BVI structures, because there has been. And I'm not talking only about the infamous old Sean Murphy case. If you Google sometimes, you might be surprised what you find. That is why it is so imperative that we comply with the international standards, to send a clear message that we will provide no safe harbor for the ethically challenged, and that we do not want the BVI or BVI structures to act as a conduit for or a destination of evaded taxes, money laundering, fraud, or other sharp practices. We must comply not just because the demands of the international finance and business community. We must comply not because of the demands of the supranational powers, such as the FATF, the CFATF, the IMF, or the OECD. Nor must we comply because of demands of the United Kingdom, the United States, or the EU. We must comply because we want to comply. We must comply because we know that compliance is in our best interest. But more importantly, we must comply because the needs of the people of the British Virgin Islands, whose livelihoods so depend on the future of the industry, demand that we comply. It is therefore essential that the conduct of our business affairs should be characterized by deliberate progress, cautious pragmatism, and compliance. We must be tougher on fundamentals than flummery, more concerned with the long term than the short term, and care more about the way things actually are than the way they may look or appear to be. As regards compliance, as I have so often said before, it must be clearly understood by all of us that the non-compliance of one threatens the livelihood of all. You see, when the information needed to respond to international cooperation requests is not forthcoming, we all suffer. When a lack of practitioner oversight means that a BVI entity is abused by criminals, we all suffer. When negative stories are written about unethical behavior in our jurisdiction, we all suffer. We all suffer even more when those stories are written by our own people. Today, more than ever, being seen as compliant is an essential part of staying competitive. Retaining and winning business depends on clients having confidence that the BVI enjoys a good reputation and is not likely to be subject to international sanctions. So what does it mean to do business not as usual in this challenging world of today? It means several things. It means accepting that increased regulation and greater scrutiny will continue to be a fact of life over the coming years. The bar will continue to be raised. It means recognizing that as standards evolve and become more complex, the goalposts will change and more things will have to be regulated, such as some non-financial services business. We are already seeing some of this happening with the non-profit organizations, etc. It also means understanding that complying with laws and standards has dire implications. If the BVI is to be taken seriously, we have to monitor and rectify any deficiencies identified in the numerous reviews we undergo. Our laws must be up to scratch, and they must be fully implemented by our industry. It is not enough to talk the talk. We must walk it too. We cannot escape the specter of blacklisting simply by stating that we want to be regarded as a mainstream compliant jurisdiction. Words alone will not be enough to take the threat away. What we commit to do, we must do. Transparency must mean transparency in practice, and cooperation must mean cooperation in practice. Our laws and our mechanisms for regulation, law enforcement, international cooperation, and exchange of information must be genuinely fit for the purpose. They must work. If they don't, we will be prevented from accessing world markets. So let us not fool ourselves that doing nothing is an option. It is not. A dialogue on the best way forward should not be used or abused as an excuse for standing still. We must all work with fierce urgency now to safeguard and enhance our financial services sector. Of course, as I've said before, challenging times are also ones of great opportunity. Change and transition also bring with them new opportunities for those who are prepared to grasp them. And there is still a large global market for corporate structures and the services that BVI offer. This is still very much, or should I say there is still very much, a future for financial services jurisdictions like ours. Yes, over the past 2 years, we have faced increasingly, 2 decades, we have faced increasingly intense international pressure and scrutiny. The demands from all quarters for transparency have gotten louder. Yes, our legislation has been reviewed. Yes, we have to constantly raise our game. And yes, although the horizon may look stormy, there is also light ahead. It is natural to worry about the future for the BVI's financial services. But we cannot let that overwhelm us and cause us to freeze like a deer in the headlights. We must remain engaged with all the standard setters, not only to ensure that we are at the table when new standards that will affect us are being discussed and developed, but also to ensure that our voice is factored into the shaping of these standards. As I said, we must walk the talk. You see, what I truly fear is not the pressure we are coming under from the international community, but rather it is any complacency, laziness, or arrogance here at home. It is the idea that anyone in the BVI in whatever position could still think that it is just enough to pay lip service to regulation or compliance. It is the idea that we do not, these days, need to be extra careful about who we do business with. So let me be blunt. When we do business with those who I call ethically challenged when I'm trying to be polite, or who I call shysters or fraudsters when I'm not, we do ourselves no favors at all. Instead, we find our business practices and our territory, understandably, in the dock of world opinion, and international headlines is not the place where reputable financial services want to be. Every time this happens, every time a practitioner is indicted for negligence, it damages the reputation of BVI as a whole and draws us all down. We must forever remain cognizant that small island international financial centers will always live precariously, not the least because much of what they do can be damaged or destroyed by a stroke of a pen on shore. Accordingly, in the future, small island international financial centers like the BVI will have to take notice of attitudes not only in the large developed countries, but also in large developing countries. You see, the axis of the globe and economic governance happens to be shifting from the North Atlantic. And we must therefore forge high-level political and economic relations and alliances in Asia, Latin America, and even in some corners of Africa. These are the world's fastest growing economies. So if we are to survive, we must walk the talk, but that is only one side. If we are not just to survive but thrive, our industry must also make the most of new competitive openings provided by many enhancements to BVI laws. Yes, compliance may seem onerous, but look at the new business opportunities being created. Someone reminded me that many of the most demanded jobs in the world today were not in existence 10 and even 5 years ago. And we also need to realize that we have to prepare our children for jobs in the future that will use technology that even isn't in existence today. A number of us could talk about things that were modern technology when we were young, that now don't even exist. I'm looking at someone who knows about 8-track tapes and beta and so forth things, right? As you know, all of us have a responsible role to play. The Commission's task is to ensure that BVI rules remain fit for purpose and meet international requirements. It's the government's task to pass the right laws and to create the right environment for business to thrive and flourish. And then it's the BVI industry's task to be intelligent and creative in using these to develop new opportunities, new products, which are competitive and will win further business. The more they do that, the brighter our future will be. And of course, it is important that the future is bright for many, not just the few. For me, a successful financial services industry is one which offers opportunities to many BVI landers as possible, not just indirectly as a result of the revenue which our financial service sector brings, but directly too, as a result of the high-level employment and skills opportunity which a thriving financial sector can create. We must all do all we can to make sure that when the BVI financial services employers come to hire the best people to work in their firms, there is an ample pool of competent and qualified BVI landers to fill those posts. This sets a challenge not just for our young people to make the most of educational opportunities available, but for our policymakers to ensure that the education offered to our young people meets the highest standards and prepares and equips them for the workplace. Those who plan, run, and resource our education training system cannot afford to forget for one moment that the BVI is operating in a global market for talented and skilled people. Finally, it may be apropos to offer one more word of warning. Yes, we are a series of islands, but let us not fall prey to island mentality. Let us not fail to realize that these days, as a result of the intense scrutiny we are under, and thanks to the internet, it is increasingly the case that BVI newspapers, BVI landers' blogs and reports of BVI House of Assembly discussions are being actively followed by people living outside our territory, many who wish to do us harm, and just reading some of the things that emanate from us is harm to us. When it comes to financial services, we live in a global community. Whether we are public or private individuals, let all of our public statements reflect the fact that our islands is now part of the global community, and that anything we say may receive international scrutiny and affect BVI's reputation. I hope this brief, or not so brief look back at where we came from and look forward to where we are going, has been helpful to you. I hope it has clarified matters and perhaps calmed some of your fears. Now I look forward to your questions. And remember, there is nothing such as a foolish question, only a foolish answer. And those will be my responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathavious. There are a few people in the community who I consider a walking encyclopedia. There are people like Mr. Georges, Mr. O'Neill, and Mr. Mathavious, especially in the financial services industry. You can call them at any time and for some unknown reason just have an answer for you. I thank you very much for that very thought-provoking presentation, especially with the historical overview. I found it quite interesting. Shortly, we'll be entertaining questions from the audience. I'm sure during the presentation I see that you were listening keenly and making notes. There's microphones on each side of the aisle. Please make your presentation as short as possible so others can also participate. Mr. Mathavious, in your presentation, you talk about the issue of tax haven going back the historical overview of that. But for some unknown reason, there's still the notion that the BVI is a tax haven. What are some of the things that the territory is doing to dispel this viewpoint outside of the laws or signing tiers or meeting these international standards?
Dispelling that has been a long thing, because people are using the term tax havens now in a very pejorative, meaning they're using it almost to denigrate you, to castigate you, to stigmatize you, saying that you're secretive, you don't exchange information when you're asked. The signing of tiers has been a first step, but the signing of tiers has not been sufficient. We have to make sure that when requests come in, we can honor them. We've made a commitment to share information. We have to make sure that we can share information. The BVI has published an international cooperation handbook. It's on the Financial Services website. It's on, I believe, the IFC website, which tries to show everyone that not only that can information be sought from the BVI, but what they have to do, or the ways they have to go about to get that information. We need to send that message out that we are not a haven, we are not a secretive jurisdiction, and that we stand willing and ready to cooperate. We will not hide fraudsters.
Thank you, thank you very much. There's another question. Can you explain the importance of meeting international best practice and adhere to reporting requirements by these organizations? Sometimes you hear a country is blacklisted, and you don't quite understand what do you mean by blacklisted. Does that mean that that country cannot do business with another country? It's not quite clear for myself and others. When a country is blacklisted, what does it specifically mean?
Blacklisting is a form of sanctions. Countries who are blacklisted will find that they have difficulty doing certain types of business in the international financial community. Their banks may be denied clearing opportunities with international banks. You may find that basically the international community doesn't want to do any business with you. So your country, the practitioners, everybody in it are seen as suspect. And people are told not to do business with you. What it means, therefore, is it is a stigmatization which every country tries to avoid. In the past, BVI worked very, very hard never to be on any international blacklist. Recently, we've had some setbacks. We've seen the French have blacklisted us, and that has been as a result of us not being able to provide certain type of information that they sought. I'm not putting the blame on anyone, but I'm saying that all of us have to make sure that we are not found wanting, and we need to do every single thing to get off that list as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathavious. 1 second, please. In what ways, if any, would FATCA impact the territory financial services? Do you know of any other countries taking such a position? And also, what are some of the business opportunities that will be created as a result of FATCA? I was reading some material recently in preparation for your presentation, and they actually listed some opportunities that may be derived from FATCA. So I'm not sure how much it's going to impact the financial services industry, positively or negatively.
FATCA is what I would call a watershed moment in international cooperation. What it means is that the United States have extended their domestic laws extraterritorially, and everyone has been asked to comply. FATCA, for those of you who don't know, the Foreign Accounts, FA, oh, I'm getting up. Okay, let me not tell you what it means. Let me tell you what it really means. It means finding American tax cheats abroad. What the United States are doing is they're looking for people who are required to pay American taxes who have not been paying either taxes at all or the right share. What this is going to do is it's going to force people to report to the United States or face some serious thing. The challenges, yes, the challenges are complying with the requirements by all the institutions. It has changed the exchange of information from exchange of information on request to now where institutions have to automatically report. And the sad thing is that this is but the first of what you're going to see coming on internationally. In the BVI, we already can talk about the sons of FATCA, because the UK are now requiring us to do the same thing. You are going to see more. So this is a watershed moment. Opportunities, I suppose accountants and so forth may find a little bit more opportunities, but it is a compliance burden on governments, on institutions, and every single thing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathavious. One last question before I...
There is something that I think the BVI government has conducted its own analysis, and I would hope that they report, particularly since there are people who may be affected, BVI landers with dual citizenship and so forth, who I do not think have been educated sufficiently about it. The importance is that you have to try to ascertain as much information as possible to make sure that you are not an unintended consequence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathavious. I hope that don't mean when we go into the United States, we get stopped at the border and taken into custody for not paying our taxes. One last question.
Remember, I said the BVI is not going to support anyone not paying taxes where it is absolutely due. I think that if we are not going to provide shelter to anyone who is trying to evade their tax obligation. And we are actually seeing in other countries a number of Americans are giving up their citizenship. They are saying that FATCA is a bridge too far, and they are they're voting with their feet.
Thank you very much for that insight. I was privileged, I think it was last month, to travel to Scrub Island, where Porsche and Russell Business Outlook had their conference. And in the package that they presented, a research was conducted by oil, and in there, it said jurisdiction by importance. Yes, the BVI is still at the top, but if you move forward in 5 years, they have a number of other countries surpassing us. I think you touched briefly on that. What are some of the things that we can do to continue our competitive edge, that we do not lose that competitive edge to a number of these countries that are surging, such as Hong Kong and others? Because it was very important, I think, that we open the office over there, and I'm sure we're going to see some benefits from that already.
The world is changing. As the market changes, so must we also. One of the sad things is that because we have been so bogged down by fighting the international initiatives, the industry has stopped doing something it best does, which is innovate, come up with creative new solutions. Everyone in the room, I believe, have read that book, Who Moved My Cheese? As the cheese moves, so must we. We have to continue to look. That's what I'm trying to say. We must pool our resources, look for these creative opportunities. If we stay stagnant, we will be surpassed. What we have to do is adapt to the changes. I said, look for new markets. I've even identified some places where new strategic relationships have to be developed. But we also have to realize that we can't continue doing the same thing time and time again and expect new results. That is insanity. We have to be adaptive, be flexible, be bold, be imaginative, and move to where the cheese is moving.
Audience, it's now your opportunity to pose any questions to Dr. Mathavious, as he stated earlier. Just shoot your question at him and he will answer it as best as possible. So we have microphones here and here. Any questions as yet from the audience? Any hands? No? This is a very important topic that there should be a lot of burning questions. One other area, while someone moved to the microphone, one other area with the young people in the industry. As I was walking in, I saw a number of young students outside congregating and talking, and I said, I hope they are waiting to come to this event because the future lies with them. And the area that I want to pose a question is that every so often that we hear that British Virgin Islanders or long-time residents are having difficulties obtaining top management positions within the industry. What are some of the things can they do to make themselves more marketable? I recall when one of my nieces was coming home, just finished law school, I said to her, don't come home, stay away for 5 years or 6 years, and then get that experience. And she said, who's going to pay my bill? Are you going to send me money every month to pay my rent and what's not? And I said, you're young. 5 years is not a long time. 4 years is not a long time. Why don't you link with a company, a BVI company, who have branches overseas and see if they're willing to give you that opportunity? Would you propose or promote things like that to businesses for young graduates, young professionals who want to enter the industry, whether it's through a program like what Harney's is offering or some other company, or some of them just going through the institutions and coming right back home?
That's an interesting question. And there are various strategies to be employed. You mentioned Harney's have a rotational system. If you look at places like the commission, we train our staff to make sure they can do the job. I think that there's nobody I don't think there's any organization which devotes as much time and money to training as we do. But we sometimes behave as if we have an entitlement. Not everybody was as lucky as me who came in the parachute, the helicopter way. I didn't have to work my way up. I was dropped in and above. But that isn't going to happen in all the cases. We have to make sure that the firms, the companies who are here, have a attitude that is what I say is a good corporate citizen to BVI, and that they will seek and promote qualified, competent BVI landers. But we also have to make sure that our people do try to become prepared, skilled, and competent in order to obtain those jobs. I don't think there is no job that is going to be ours because we are British Virgin Islanders. And we have to stop that entitlement and make sure that we seek the opportunities, we demand the training, We have to make sure that the government training thing is a little bit more focused for the industry than it is. And we also have to stop believing that people go to university, study what they want, come back with a qualification, and therefore they say that I am qualified and competent to do this job. I think we have, there has to be dialogue between the industry and the scholarship committee a little bit more. We would like to see industry participating in some of those scholarship programs, participating in the training, and also that you give our education, as I said in the end of the speech, our education has to also be geared more towards helping the students take relevant courses and relevant things that will prepare them better for the industry than it currently does. But it has to be a joined-up action on all parts. It is something that is a must. We just can't have our young people feeling that the industry is something that they don't have a future in, or else they will destroy the industry for us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathavious. I see some industry leaders in the audience. Would you like to pose a question or comment, anyone, before we wrap it up? Thank you. You can come right here, or thank you. Turn it on.
That's a very, very good question. And the answer is yes. It will take a toll on you. No one wants to do business with a country whose reputation has been sullied, because it is almost assumed internationally that the reason why you will be operating out of that blacklisted country maybe because you yourself have some degree of shadiness. Secondly, you are going to find internationally the country itself is going to have difficulty doing things, participating in the international financial community. There's going to be international sanctions brought to bear against you. Now, in the case of the BVI, we have never been on an international blacklist. We are on the French blacklist. We are on the Venezuelan blacklist, which we've always been on. I think we are on Mexico's blacklist. But it is on the international blacklist, which can result in sanctions, which can have your banks and so forth, having difficulties participating internationally that we don't want to be. But you are right. We put a lot of care and attention to making sure that we do not send signals that we want the wrong type of business, the wrong type of people in our shores, and that we will shelter them. Those are the things which a blacklist connotes. It is ethical, it is economical, and it is desirable not to be on a blacklist. And I hope that there is not so much black things of that type happening, because then it means that somebody is not doing their work.
Thank you very much for posing that question to Dr. Mathavious, and Dr. Mathavious for your thorough response. Any more questions, please, from the audience? Thank you. Come right up. Or you rather I come around with the microphone? Which one? I know some people are shy, they don't want to come to the front, but I don't mind walking around. Yes.
I like that question. First of all, overregulation is just as bad as poor regulation. In the BVI, we seek not to overregulate. We do acknowledge that proper regulation attracts, it does not deter the type of business that we want to have. We seek neither light touch nor light regulation. We seek to have right touch regulation that is differentiated in the sense that it applies the right level of regulatory oversight to the right type of business. However, we do agree that if one sits on the fence and says, everybody must do this at the same thing, the so-called level playing field argument, there are some times when we may be a little bit more regulated or a little bit less regulated than thing. But our attempt is to achieve that equilibrium, and we don't ever want to be found wanting. So yes, we will always err on the side of effective and proper regulation. We don't want to be found wanting.
Thank you very much for posing that question. Any more questions from the audience? Anyone from this side? Yes, go right ahead. If you can project, or if not, come right down to the microphone, please.
Remember, I said I was speaking for myself, not for the government or the commission. But anyway, the BVI recognizes that moving up the value chain is very, very critical and important to continue to be a functional international financial center. And it harbors aspirations of providing greater value. It does not have to be in the same particular areas. Here is where we challenge the industry to be innovative, to be creative. When BVI came up with its concept of the IBC Act, nobody else did. We challenged the industry to be creative, to be innovative, to seek out those new opportunities that exist, those new opportunities that are constantly evolving and present in the global workplace. The problem which we are seeing is that the service providers, including the service providers we have in the BVI, are all subscribing to quote-unquote centers of excellence. They are determining that country X is the center of excellence for this, country Y is the center of excellence for that. We are seeing service providers who display absolutely no loyalty to any jurisdiction. That's the challenge.
Thank you. Go right ahead. I think that one is not working. Use the one from the gentleman, please.
Yeah, my question to you is, the larger issue for me is, why do we allow certain big, large countries to impose their internal issue on an international audience? I mean, it seems to me that we talk about global community, but when you really look at it, it's a global community for a very small group of rich and powerful nations.
I like that question. And the reason why I like that question is I can't remember saying something that I know I prepared. I can't remember describing the global financial marketplace as something very much akin to an international animal farm. You remember Animal Farm? And what it says is might has right. What's good for them is bad for us. The unfortunate thing is they determine the game. We are trying to capitalize on wealth planning, asset planning opportunities from them. That is why I said that we must note now that the balance or the axis of the world is shifting, moving away from the North Atlantic. We are seeing, people say the BRIC countries, but we are seeing Asia, we are seeing Latin America becoming much, much more important and significant. So, whilst the powers of the OECD and the powers of the continue to exercise might, and while we have to try to be nimble and seek for opportunities to get the crumbs that they are dropping off of their table, I agree that we have to now start looking at these new emerging things and make sure that they are our friends and that we can service them better. But you are right. The fact is that we are like the mouse, they are like the elephant. And we can only seek for the crevices under their feet and maneuver ourselves to exploit them.
Interesting, Dr. Mathavious. We are the mouse.
And the mouse can roar sometimes.
Yes, good evening. Dr. Mathavious, could you elaborate a little bit more on the issue of the ultimate beneficial owner registry, what it is and how it will impact the BVI?
Sharp question. The United Kingdom, Cameron, has asked overseas territories to subscribe to his notion of having public central registers of beneficial ownership, and which he wants to be available to the public. The BVI and a number of overseas territories have agreed to consult with their industries on that matter. Our consultation is still going on, so this gives opportunities for everyone to shed their voice, to at least put their voice in the matter. It is interesting that when the call first came for public and central registries, we were one of the few who spoke out against having a central or public register. As a matter of fact, I'll take you back to, let's say for 2 decades, we've been fighting this very issue. we have been subscribing to the fact that unlike the United Kingdom, unlike the United States, we believe we have a better way of getting that information. We regulate trust and company service providers. We hold them to FATF standards of AML, CFT, anti-money laundering and combating the financial terrorism requirements. And that enables us to access the information in ways that the UK so far can't. But the consultation is there. We have seen even this week the European Parliament has come out seeking not only beneficial ownership information on companies, they're seeking beneficial ownership information with trust, etc. And what I tell everyone on that matter is that now the United Kingdom and the United States have a fight on their hands. They have a fight not with us. They have a fight with the EU. We should not push our head above the parapet. We should let them settle the fight on trust structures and so forth. And when they're finished, I believe we will find that sense will obtain. But I don't want to prejudge what will be the BVI or the BVI government's response whilst the consultation is still in process. Because I don't want somebody to leave here and say that the government of the BVI, although I'm not speaking for them, has made up their mind as to what they're going to do. We're still waiting for as many comments, ideas, suggestions as will come in on that consultation period. But good question. Keep watching this space.
Thank you very much for posing your question. Next question on this side. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should like, as a comment, to first of all, to commend Mr. Mathavious for a very comprehensive and lucid lecture. The subject is very difficult, but I think, we are fortunate that we have a man who has such a thorough knowledge and practice of the subject to deliver this enlightening lecture. I have a question, sir, which is, does the BVI's political status of not being independent help or hinder our chances of progress in this area?
Good question. I have always maintained that the word British in our name has been very, very good for business, whilst we, particularly in the last century, it has been good for business because people have come to associate the British laws with probity, with certainty, with a number of things that they want, and it has served us well. A few years ago, when Bermuda was considering independent, and they ran into trouble because people thought that they were going to dish away the British crown, I told the Bermudan government that they should have paid me to give them an advertising slogan, and the slogan would have been that after independence we'll still be British. Because you see, to me, that is a pacifier. They think British has a pacifier effect. But in recent years, one has to ask the question, as the United States is showing, as applying its laws extraterritorially, as Europe is applying its laws extraterritorially, far too often we have seen the United Kingdom using us as pawns on the anvil of their EU agenda. So, when it suits them, they sacrifice us. And even the Cameron recent endorsement that the overseas territories and the crown dependencies should not be viewed as tax havens is a debatable sometimes whether it's a blessing or whether it's a curse. How they are going to apply it and how we are able to make sure that they will not do anything that sacrifices us. You see, Cameron's is not really concerned about protecting us. He is concerned about protecting the city of London. And even the question which the gentleman over there asked about beneficial ownership, Cameron and the UK Treasury is well poised, or was well poised, to give up beneficial ownership for corporates as long as they could have protected their thriving trust industry. However, now that the EU continues to seek to include trust within not only the EU savings directives, but now the beneficial ownership, we may see a slight change in Cameron's philosophy. So, independence, to me, is a state of mind. I am independent. You are independent. But in the world of the 21st century, where everything is so interconnected, integrated, where the world continues to get smaller because of technology, etc., the old-fashioned notion of independence no longer exists. And those of us who went to places like University of the West Indies know that a number of West Indian countries seem to have thought that independence gave them a license to beg. Unfortunately, we can't.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathavious. We will have our last question from a young person, which is quite appropriate. Go right ahead, sir.
Good night. My question is, how does our compliance to regulation and whitelist status benefit locally owned BVI companies who have desires of expanding beyond our shores? Thank you.
Repeat the last part.
Locally owned BVI companies who have desires to expand beyond our shores. So companies that don't want to stay local and cater only to our population.
I'm not too sure how, what I will say is compliance will not damage them if they have designs to go out into the wider community, because if they compliance is, as I said, compliance is the linchpin around which the industry has to hinge itself, and I can't see them suffering from being compliant at all. But I don't think I answered. Maybe we should have a discussion after. Let me see if I can better understand and better and better appreciate where you're coming from and see what I can do to assist in that in easing your concerns.
Thank you very much for posing that question. Okay, with the young people, we must give them opportunity. One last one for another young person.
Good night. Moving back to the blacklist. Once blacklisted, can you be removed from the list? If so, how?
Can you be removed from you're talking about the French blacklist?
Yes.
Or in general?
Well, in general.
Yes, you can be removed from blacklist. You can be removed from blacklist by removing whatever the country or whoever has blacklisted you have considered offensive. If you're not cooperating, if you're not, usually it is something with cooperation. So by removing the barriers to cooperation, Yes. Now, on the case of the French blacklist, I think there were some specific requests that has not provided the information. If we can get that information channeled to them, I believe there is the possibility of being removed. There were 2 other countries who are blacklisted with us, and they have been removed already. So we are working hard to be removed also.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being your moderator this evening and working alongside with Dr. Mathavious. I will now turn the remainder of the evening on to Dr. Smith for closing remarks.
And please call me Mr. Mathavious. I know that.
I told Dr. Mathavious he's on my turf, so he has to abide by the title this evening. In fact, I really want us to give him another round of applause. Thanks also to Jeremiah for ably moderating this evening's activity. I know it was a task. I called to the Ministry of Finance and requested one person, and they said, well, if they can't come, they'll send somebody else, so I need not worry about that. And I think they have fulfilled their end of the bargain. So thank you very much. To you, the audience, thank you for coming out this evening and being a part of our lecture series. Again, I want to remind you that we continue with one lecture every month. The college sees it as an opportunity to reach out to the community so that we can have an academic discussion on topics affecting us here in the Virgin Islands. This evening, we focused on financial services. When Mr. Mathavious, at the time, was awarded an honorary PhD, and I saw him immediately thereafter. I informed him that he's going to be on my list of speakers as Dr. Mathavious. So we've had that this evening. And it's a pleasure to have been here and to be a part of this. We continue next month again. We try on the 3rd Thursday in every month. Today being the 4th Thursday, we had to shift to accommodate Dr. Mathavious' schedule. But we continue next month on the 20th of March with Dancia Penn QC. And then on the 24th of April, we have Dr. Christopher Malcolm, and on May the 22nd, Dr. Catherine Smith. And as I said, we have flyers on your way out. Do take one with you so that you could be reminded of the upcoming lectures. And the last set at the bottom of the flyer, the Freedom Lectures, which we hope to do within communities. And if you're a part of a community group or organization and you would like to host one of these lectures, feel free to give me a call, because what we want to do, we want to take these outside of the college, in communities across the territory, and with specific groups. We have several lectures that we want to present as a part of our celebration of freedom. And we want those to be done within communities, not necessarily here at the college, throughout the Virgin Islands. Last year, I did several. I did one in Virgin Gorda. I also did one in Anegada. We still owe them one in Jocelyn Night, because on the date that we were planning to do that one, they had another activity. But this year we want to cover more territory. So all of the communities around Tortola, we want to have these lectures so that those persons who can't make it here to the college for a formal lecture, that we can go into the community and we can share. All a part of our initiatives within the Virgin Islands Studies Institute to be able to share information. And as I said, the lectures provide an opportunity for us to have an academic discussion on matters of interest to life within the Virgin Islands. If you have a topic that you would like to see us discuss in the future, also feel free to to let me know. And if you feel that you're up to the challenge and want to deliver a lecture, you can also let me know. So I'm quite open. Dr. Mathavious has indicated that this is a very important topic which we can continue the discussion on. So I'm hoping that in our next series we can also have another lecture on financial services. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure having you here with us at HLSCC, and thank you and good night.